Hi, I'm Tom Davis, Global Sector Lead for Health and Nutrition for World Vision International, based in Geneva. This is an online version of a presentation I originally gave at the 2009 Core Group Fall Meeting on the Science of Persuasion, using persuasion principles and techniques in food security, child survival, and other community development programs. This is part 2 of a series, and you can click on the link on this page to load up the introduction to this series. I gave this when I was working for the TOPS project as a Food for the Hungry employee, their senior director for program quality. I really hope that you enjoy it. Thank you. Okay, let's discuss the second principle of persuasion, social proof. The prominent theorists on this are Albert Bandura and Robert O'Connor. And what it says is that what those around us think is true is enormously important to us in deciding what we ourselves think is true. One means that we use to determine what is correct is to find out what other people think is correct, especially in terms of the way we decide what constitutes correct behavior. We view a behavior as more correct in a given situation to the degree to which we see others performing it. This obviously is not a black and white thing, but we have different, we look at what those around us think and are doing in terms of when we want to decide what we need to think and do. This is one of the cards that was used to demonstrate this principle scientifically. Look at the two cards and decide which line on the right, A, B, or C, is closest to that line in the card on the left. C, right? It's pretty obvious, right? Well, that depends. If there are two people in a room with you, and I have the first two people that I've briefed beforehand say that A is the closest in length, and you are that third person, you are much more likely to agree with them and get it wrong. In fact, researchers found out that when they repeat this with multiple cards, people answered incorrectly 74% of the time on at least one of the cards, and 20% of the people got it wrong at least once, conforming to what others had said half the time. This is from the Ash conformity experiments, and these studies have been replicated in many different places. And I would expect this to be even more true in developing countries where conformity is sometimes more highly valued. So we are highly suggestible and look to others to confirm even what seems very obvious to us at times. Some other examples. Laugh tracks and the claqueurs for the opera. This is something that's been used for years to help people to laugh more when they're watching something. They'll put a laugh track behind it. Some people don't like them, but the fact is that they seem to work. When people hear other people laughing, they're more likely to laugh along. And at the opera, they would hire people in the past to start clapping vigorously for certain operas, and that would encourage other people to respond in the same sort of way. Most people think it's stupid, phony, obvious maybe, but it works, and it works best sometimes for poor jokes. Some other examples. Salting tip jars. One of the reasons why anytime you see a tip jar, there'll usually be some money in it, is because people have learned that by putting a little bit of money in that tip jar to begin with, other people are encouraged to put money in. When you have an empty tip jar, people take that as a sign that nobody's giving tips, and they're less likely to give tips. Even Billy Graham has used this. He would find ringers who would come up at a specific time to give witnesses or donations. Now, these were people who wanted to do that anyway, but he would talk to them in advance and say, at this point, would you be willing to come up since you're planning on doing this donation and be the first one to give the donation or to give a witness? Advertisers talk about this is the fastest growing company or the best selling product. And that sort of language proves to us that it's good by convincing us that a lot of other people think that it's good. That's one reason that they use language like that. So it's hard to deny that this principle is not something that works and that works regularly and is used regularly in our everyday surroundings. Okay, here's another study that was done on this. Researchers get the word out that people in New Haven, Connecticut are considered charitable people For example, by putting information on that into newspapers. 2 weeks later, a researcher calls housewives and asks for donations. Results were donations increased. When it works best is when people are more likely to follow the leader or the group when the situation is unclear or ambiguous. So when you have situations where people really don't want to know what to do. Think, for example, people are in a relief setting. Maybe they've just come into a camp. They're much more likely to be looking around and saying, well, what are other people doing? Where are they defecating? How are they putting up their tents? So people are looking around trying to find someone to follow. So it's more likely to be used when the situation's unclear and ambiguous. We're also more likely to look to people who are just like us when looking for people to emulate. So it's much more likely that if we see someone who doesn't look like us very much, we won't follow them as well as looking for what other people who seem to be like me do in this situation. Which is one reason sometimes that the best people to have demonstrating things are people that look like the beneficiary group that you're working with, not someone who is very different or from a different social class or whatever. The exception is that we'll follow authorities even when they're not like us. Look at the Milgram experiments for a lot of very powerful information about how we sometimes will follow authorities even when we shouldn't, just because they're authorities. Here are some more examples of this principle. For example, school-based anti-smoking programs were found to have lasting effects only when it used the same age peer leaders as teachers. In another study, young children terrified of dogs saw a 20 minutes of video daily for 4 days of a child playing happily with a dog. And then after this intervention, 67% were willing to climb into a pen with a dog alone. Another example, children who saw a film depicting a child's positive visit to the dentist lowered their anxieties, but principally when they were the same age as the children shown in the film. Also, when most severely withdrawn children in school were shown a 23-minute video with 11 scenes of solitary children watching an activity, and then that child would join in to everyone's enjoyment. Immediately, the children who saw this began interacting with peers at normal levels. And at 6 weeks, these children were leading in the amount of social activity that they showed. David Phillips talks about the Werther or copycat effect. This is where more suicides and fatal car accidents occur in the months after well-publicized suicide news stories, and that homicides increase after highly publicized acts of violence, even after heavyweight championship fights. And then there are the bystander inaction studies that basically find people say since no one appeared to be concerned, nothing must be wrong. People watch people to decide how to respond. And so in a typical experiment, the participant is either alone or among a group of other participants or confederates. An emergency situation is then staged. For example, they have smoke that pours from a vent in the room, or a person falling down and becoming injured, or a student having an epileptic fit. And what they find is if the other people in the room show that they're not very interested in what's happening, that other third person is much less likely to take any action at all when they see this happening. Here's another experiment by Aronson and O'Leary. They had a sign in a shower area on how to conserve water. I was talking about, sometimes people talk about a Navy shower. It's that you basically turn on the water and then you turn off the water and soap up and then turn on the water again. So there's no water during the soap up. And when they had a sign up telling people that they needed to do that, to basically turn off the water while they're soaping up, only 6% of the people did so. But when they had one accomplice who models it with their back to these other students who came into the shower area, what would you think would happen? Well, when the new students enter the showers with that one accomplice who's doing that, 49% of the people showered in that way. They turned off the water during soap up. When they had two people modeling it who were doing the same thing and they had the water off while they're soaping up, 67% of people did it. So there are no punitive measures, no communication other than this little sign, just the modeling. And it brought about this dramatic increase in the behavior. This is another set of experiments that was done by Cialdini. They put flyers under all car windows in a library parking lot. And in the condition number 1, this first group, they had an accomplice there was basically a Confederate in the experiment, who picks up a littered bag and throws it away as one of the research subjects is walking to his or her car. When they did that, none of the subjects threw the flyer on the ground. They saw this person not littering, and they didn't litter as well. Condition number 2, they have an accomplice walk by the person but does nothing, doesn't pick up trash. In that case, 33% of the people throw the flyer on the ground. So when they saw the person trying to avoid littering, he's actually picking up a bag and throwing it away, they felt that they shouldn't litter. But when this accomplice walks by and does nothing, even though there's another person there, a third of them littered. There was a second study done where there was no accomplice, and they just set up the situation so that there were a lot of flyers. There were flyers on the cars, but also a lot of flyers just on the ground. And in that case, a lot of people would go to their car, pick the flyer up and throw it on the ground. In condition number 2, they would only have one flyer on the ground, even though all the cars are covered with them on their windshield. And in that case, there's a lot less littering. So people kind of look at the situation often to decide, what should I do? Okay, so just a bit of a review. We talked about salting the tip jar and using ringers, publicizing positive results of polls and surveys, modeling, giving testimonies, using videos or stories of people like me doing the behavior, and making the behavior visible and using identifiers. So this has some overlap with actually the consistency and commitment principle as well. And encouraging copycat behavior of positive things like publicizing or shining a spotlight on community or individual actions or contests. So how can we use this? Well, some examples of that would be to do small-scale surveys with a sample of people and see to what degree do they agree with different phrases that require very little commitment, up to more increasingly strong statements, and then disseminating the results. So maybe I would have a statement such as, it's okay for some people to exclusively breastfeed their children. That's a very kind of weak statement. And maybe a stronger one would be, I believe exclusively breastfeeding could help my child to grow better. That would be an increasingly strong one. And then maybe the strongest would be something like, everyone should exclusively breastfeed their children to avoid illnesses and to help them grow. And then if I found out that the majority of people said one of those statements, let's say it's the second one, I would publicize those results and let people know the majority of people here believe that it's good to exclusively breastfeed your child, and you could show them that result. And as people interpret that that is the norm to believe this, you'll find people leaning towards that norm and beginning to believe the same things themselves. Also using more guided testimonials, and that's where you would pick someone. You should be conscious of age, gender, and socioeconomic status when sort of choosing that person. You want a person that seems kind of representative of the group that you're dealing with, or at least have different people from different groups giving testimonies. And then brief that person ahead of time on what are the things that you'd like them to talk about. This might be someone that you heard, like a mother saying, I did exclusive breastfeeding and I'm very happy about it. And then you talk with her, try to draw out some, what did she say the benefits were, what did she like about it, how did she work around any problems, and then that person could give a talk at a mother's club. The same thing could be done with farmer field schools, of having farmers talking about their positive experience with something. And that sort of guided testimonial or testimonials can be really helpful in getting people to adopt a behavior. Consider salting the tip jar by giving some people the chance to commit early in the behavior change process, at least verbally, if not publicly. Or at least check in and tell those who are sure they'll commit to raise their hands, but never ask those who will not commit to do so. So in a meeting, you could say, how many of you would like to begin using improved seeds at this point? And you have people raise their hand to sort of show that they're voicing some commitment to trying this out, or they're interested in trying it. And other people, if you, we generally only ask those things of when you feel like you can get a majority of people to respond positively. So if you're not quite there of people saying they're willing to use improved seeds, you might say, how many people would like to see a demonstration of this, of what sort of results you can have if you use improved seeds? Also, you can use trajectory statements. Using the truth and a forward-looking view of a person's character. We talked a little bit about this in the other presentation. So tell people that they are what you want them to be, and articulate that very clearly and frequently. For example, don't say, it's important to visit all of your neighbors every 2 weeks. That's a subtle command. And instead you'd say, we know that all of you farmer field school leaders are conscientious and find it very important to ensure that all your neighbors are visited every 2 weeks. That's a statement about who they are as people. And maybe it's not true of 100% of them. But if you use those sort of forward-looking statements, you can help people to become the type of person that they often would like to be. We need to present a vision of people, present a vision to people of who they are and who they can become. Also, when looking for subcommitments, ask specific people if they're willing to be the ones to first make the commitment prior to a meeting. So you might pull aside a couple of your farmers in a farmer field group, for example, and ask them if they would be willing to try out a new agricultural practice. And then say, well, I'm going to ask people here at this meeting if they're willing to try this out. And when I do that, would you raise your hand and tell other people why you're willing to do it? So you brief people a little bit ahead of time. When you're having trouble getting commitments, ask people in smaller groups is also something that will often work. It's a lot easier to find a couple of people that agree in a smaller group. They'll represent a larger percentage of the people in the group if you find 2 out of 5 versus 1 out of 20. Publicize positive examples like early case seeking for pneumonia, or farmers who have been willing to begin using organic fertilizer. Publicize those to promote the sort of copycat activities and get other people to try them out. Incentivize modeling. For example, you should have your trainers washing their hands when eating publicly. And you should maybe pull together a group of people at a training and saying, now we're going to have a hand washing station set up. We'd like for all of you, because you're kind of the leaders of this group, to be the first ones in line. Get people used to modeling for other people the behavior they'd like to see. Make visible people or households that they're practicing a behavior. For example, Haiti Health Foundation used early exclusive breastfeeding stickers that they would put on households of mothers who would do that. So especially for behaviors that you're not going to see that easily, if you have a way to identify that household and for people to model it by having a sticker that says, I am doing this, and making what is maybe invisible behavior in the household more visible to outsiders. That same sort of thing has been done, for example, with recycling in the U.S. To have a way that if people see the containers outside of the house visible, they're more likely to think, oh, I guess I should be doing that too. Or say, for example, a sticker that says, we're all vaccinated, that you could put on the door jamb of a household where the mother and the father have had all their children completely immunized or under a year of age.